labor variance. So we are going to solve these problems using MS Word. So these are the set of problems. Along with the problems, I'm going to explain you the solutions, how to solve the labor variance questions. So to begin with, the first one is a basic problem to understand how to calculate the labor rate variance, labor efficiency variance, and labor cost variance. Basically, the labor cost variance or the labor variance as such is composed of three things. One is labor cost variance is made up of two components. One is the labor rate variance and one more is labor efficiency variance. In addition to this, we also come across what is known as labor mix variance, and we also come across what is known as labor yield variance. So all these calculations we are going to discuss in today's session. So the first problem is on the standard time and the rate for unit A are given below. The standard hours is 15, the standard rate is 4 hours. The actual data and the related informations are given. The actual production comes to 1000 units. Actual hours is 15,300 and the actual rate is 3 rupees 90 paisa per hour. So in this regard, we need to calculate labor rate variance, labor efficiency and labor cost variance. So when you are calculating the labor rate variance is the difference between the standard wages that we have paid and the actual wages that is paid, and that is multiplied with the actual number of hours. So in this case, the standard wages paid is 4 rupees per hour and the actual wages paid is 3 rupees 90 per hour. So when the actual wages paid is less than the standard, we say it is a favorable variance. So that is multiplied with the actual number of hours, that is 15,300, and we get 1,530 as a favorable variance. That is favorable labor rate variance. Now labor efficiency. So efficiency is all about how much time the labor has taken comparing to standard and how much actually hours he has spent. So in this case, if you observe, the standard hours is 15 for 1 unit, but the actual production taken place is 1000 units. So we need to first find out what is the standard hours for 1000 units. So accordingly, when I say a standard hours, so 1000 units multiplied by 15, that becomes 15,000 becomes our standard hours, minus the actual number of hours is taken is 15,300. So if you observe between these two, standard hours was 15,000, but the labor has taken 15,300 hours. So if the actual hours taken is more than the standard, it becomes an unfavorable variance. So in this case, it is 1,200 unfavorable or the adverse variance. So the labor cost variance is made up of two things. One is the labor rate and labor efficiency. So if I want to directly calculate the labor cost variance, so it's the total amount of standard labor cost minus the total actual labor cost. So if I want to find out what is the total standard labor cost, so standard rate multiplied by standard hours we need to multiply. The standard rate is given as 4 rupees and the standard hours is mentioned as 15,000, minus the actual rate is 3 rupees 90 paisa, the actual hours is 15,300. So accordingly, if you see here, it comes to around 330 as a favorable variance. So this can be cross-checked between whether the answer is right or wrong. So what do I do is I just add up the labor rate variance and labor efficiency variance. So labor rate variance is having a favorable, whereas labor efficiency variance is having a adverse. So if I find the net effect of this, so we have finally the labor cost variance as 330 as a favorable one, which means so whatever standard was kept for doing a particular task, when the actual task was performed, finally it resulted into a better side. So in this way, in this problem we understood what is labor rate variance, labor efficiency and labor cost variance. So let's move on to the second one. So in the second problem, again we are supposed to calculate directly the labor cost variance from the information. Standard production is 100 units, standard hours is 500 hours, wage rate per hour is 2 rupees, Actual production is 85 units. Actual time taken is 450 hours. Actual wage rate paid is 2 rupees 10 per hour. So again, what is the point to observe here is the standard production is 100 units. Standard hours is 500 hours. So again, if you see here, the wage rate per hour is given as a 2 rupees. So where actual production is taken as 85 units. So what is that calculation, or what is the working note that we are supposed to do before we go for calculating the labor cost variance in this problem? So when you know that the standard production is 100 units and the standard hours is 500 hours, for every 1 unit, what is the standard time the labor has to utilize? So divide the standard hours by the standard production, we get a 5 hours. So once you know this, a 5 hours is a standard time for 1 unit. Accordingly, what is the standard hours for the actual production? Here, the actual production is only 85 units. And for 85 units, what is the standard time the laborers are supposed to spend? So 85 into 5, if you do, you get 425 hours. In other words, I can go with another way of calculating. That is, if for 100 units, the standard hours is 500 hours. So for 85 units, how much? So if I do with cross multiplication, 85 into 500 divided by 100, I get the same answer. Now once you know this is a standard hours for actual production, then let's calculate labor cost variance. So the labor cost variance is equal to standard labor cost minus the actual labor cost, which is standard rate into standard hours minus actual rate into actual hours. So by substituting the values, the standard rate is given as, that is 425 hours. So I just mentioned, I just put it reverse. The standard rate is 2 rupees per hour, the wage rate, and the standard hours of production is 425 hours. So it should be reverse here. Standard rate is rupees 2 and the standard hours is 425 hours, minus the actual rate is given as a 2 rupees 10 paisa multiplied by the actual hours is 450 hours. Now, so when you multiply now, 425 into 2, you get 850 minus 450 into 2.10, you get 945. Now since actual amount of labor cost is more than the standard, so we say there is an adverse labor cost as such. So in this way, so when you're not given, or when in this problem, what we did was we tried to find out what are the standard hours for actual production. So that was not given for us, so we need to find out. We are given for 100 unit what was the standard hours, but in case if 100 unit itself was produced, then no problem. But since the number of actual production took place was less than the standard number of units, so we need to first find out what is the standard hours for this actual production. So by doing that cross multiplication, we found out how much is the standard hours for the actual production. Now let's go to the third problem. So in the problem third, so it is basically about when a variety of labors are involved in manufacturing of a product, so what kind of variance that we normally see. So in this problem we may come across, we observe that there is a material what you call the material rate variance, the labor rate variance, labor R variance, as well as the labor mix variance. So all the varieties of variance we can observe in this particular problem. So the standard labor hours and the rate of production for 1 unit of article P, it is mentioned here. So if you're manufacturing 1 unit of article P, the skilled laborers have to spend 5 hours on 1 unit, so they will be paid 1 rupees 50 paisa per hour. Unskilled workers have to spend 8 hours, so they will be paid 50 paisa per hour. Semi-skilled workers need to spend 4 hours, and the wage rate for them is 75 paisa per hour. So accordingly, the total payment for these workers for manufacturing 1 unit is given. The actual number of articles produced was 1000 units. So accordingly, the skilled workers, how many hours you have spent for manufacturing these 1000 units. They are given 4500 hours. The rate is 2 rupees. Unskilled workers have spent 10,000 hours. The rate is 45 paisa. Semi-skilled workers have spent 4200 hours. That comes to 75 paise. Now we are supposed to calculate labor cost variance and labor mix variance. So when we want to go for calculating labor cost variance, so again if you observe this information, the standard hours is given for per unit. So we need to find out if the 1000 units are manufactured, then what should be the standard labor hours. So hence the standard labor hours for actual output will be equal to the number of articles produced into standard hour per unit. So accordingly for skilled workers, so 1000 units into 5000 hours, unskilled workers 1000 into 8, semi-skilled workers 1000 into 4. So this will give us the standard labor hours for the actual output. So once you know what is the standard labor hours for actual output, then let's move on to find out the labor cost variance. So again using the same formula, that is the labor cost variance is equal to standard labor cost minus actual labor cost. So accordingly the skilled workers, the standard rate is 1.5, the standard hours of production for 1000 unit is 5000. Similarly actual rate is 2 rupees, actual hours worked is 4500. So accordingly when you can find here the actual cost is more than the standard. So in case of semi-skilled workers, so there is an adverse variance. Similarly when you calculate for the other group of employees, so in case of unskilled workers, again we have an adverse variance, and for semi-skilled workers also we have an adverse variance. So in all, so the total labor cost variance for all the three category of employees, if you calculate, so it comes to 2150 as an adverse variance. So along with this we are supposed to calculate what is known as the labor mix variance. So when you're calculating labor mix variance, so what are the points you need to remember? So labor mix variance comes into picture when the different set of workers are working on manufacturing a given product. Next, in that case we would like to know whether there is any labor mix variance in this case. So labor mix variance is also calculated using this formula, that is labor mix variance is equal to revised standard hours for actual output minus the actual hours multiplied by standard rate. So in this case if you observe, what is the standard hours? The total standard hours put in by all the three workers put here is 17,000, plus the actual hours put in by all the three workers is 18,700. So whenever you find there is a difference in the total standard hours and the actual standard hours, then we need to go for calculating what is known as the revised standard hours. So the revised standard hours is calculated by using this formula: total hours of actual mix divided by total hours of standard mix multiplied by standard hours of each category. So in case of skilled workers, the total hours of actual mix is 18,700 divided by standard hours of actual standard hours 17,000, that is multiplied by skilled labor's standard hours, that is 5,000. So by doing so, the numerator and denominator part is going to remain same for all the three categories. So we need to multiply each one of these with the respective standard hours. So by doing so, we get skilled laborers 5,500, unskilled laborers 8,800, and semi-skilled laborers 4,400. So this becomes our revised standard hours. Now once we calculate this revised standard hours, then we should go for calculating that is labor mix variance. So once again we write the formula: labor mix variance is equal to revised standard hours for actual output minus actual hours into standard rate. Now just mention a revised standard hours for skilled labor is 5,500, actual hours is 4,500 multiplied by standard rate, that is 1.50. So accordingly if you observe here, so since actual hours taken is less than the standard revised standard hours, So we end up with getting favorable variance for skilled laborer. In case of unskilled laborers, the revised standard hours is just 8,800, but actual hours spent is 10,000. So we will end up with what is called as the adverse variance. For semi-skilled laborers, again it is going to be a favorable variance. So material mix variance for all the three categories if you look into. So 1,500 favorable, 150 is also favorable. So you get 1,650. From 1,650 if you minus 600 adverse, so you get 1,060 as a favorable, that is labor mix variance. So in this way, in this problem, so we learnt about the different set of workers who are working, and you are supposed to find out the labor mix variance. So revised standard hours need to be computed, and this revised standard hours computation comes into picture only in case if the total standard hours and the actual standard hours is different. Now let's look into the fourth problem. So this fourth problem is again a bit complex compared to the previous three problems. So here also it is again a group of workers, different set of workers are working in a factory. A gang of workers usually consists of 10 men, 5 women and 5 boys in a factory. They are paid at a standardly hourly rates of 1 rupee 25 paisa, 80 paisa and 70 paisa. In a normal week of 40 hours, the gang is expected to produce 1000 units of output. In a certain week, the gang consisted of 13 men, 4 women and 3 boys. So if you observe the composition, so what was the standard and what is the actual gang is consisting of. So the actual wages were paid in as actual wage rates is paid as 1 rupee 20 paisa, 85 paisa and 65 paisa. So in terms of composition also you are finding some difference. In terms of wage rates also you are finding there is a difference. In addition to this, 2 hours were lost due to abnormal idle time. So on account of some carelessness on the part of workers, so there was some problem due to which 2 hours was lost during that particular entire week time, and 960 units of output were produced. They were asked to manufacture in a given week of 40 hours. They are supposed to manufacture 1000, but they manufacture only 960 unit of output. So calculate the various labor variance. So in exam, if they ask us to calculate the various labor variance, then we are supposed to calculate labor cost variance, labor rate variance, labor efficiency variance, labor mix variance. If you are given a problem, if you are given a situation where there are some hours of idle time, then we should also calculate idle time, and finally yield variance also we need to compute, because how much was supposed to manufacture, but how much we actually manufactured, if there is a difference, then that accounts for labor yield variance. So what I'll do is, since this problem is we need to keep reading this problem quite oftenly while solving, so I'll just copy this problem and keep it on the left hand side. Now since the problem is already there on the left hand side of the screen, so let's look into the problem. Okay. Okay. So I just put that entire problem into a table. So what we observe here is we have 3 categories of workers. One is men, women and boys. So they have been paid on hours. So in a normal week of 40 hours, the gang is expected to produce 10,000 units. So these people are paid hourly rates. So which means now in case of this one, men, women and boys. So if 10 men are supposed to work in a factory for 40 hours. So the total number of hours that they have worked in a week is 40 hours. Similarly, 5 women. So 5 women, they are going to work for 40 hours, means total number of hours worked by all these 5 women together comes to 200. So like this, first I need to find out how many hours each class of workers have worked. So men have worked for 400, then women 200, and boys 200. Then the rate paid for each category of these employees mentioned, so the amount. Similarly, what is the actual number of hours they have worked? So if you see here, there are 13 men, 4 women, and 3 boys. So they are also expected to work in a factory for how many hours? That is 40 hours, because in a week it is 40 hours. So accordingly, so 40 into 13, it comes to 520. Then next is about 4 women. So 40 into 4, if you calculate, it comes to 160. Then 40 into 3 boys comes to 120. And the rates are already given, 1.2, 85 paisa and 65 paisa. So accordingly, if you calculate, you get these particular answers. But now the question is, now the total number of hours put in the normal situation by these people is 800. This is a standard for all the 3 class of workers together. And here if you calculate, they are also supposed to work for 800 hours. Now, when you're calculating the direct labor cost variance, again as per the formula, it goes standard cost for actual output minus actual cost. Now what is standard cost for actual output? So in this case, the standard cost for actual output, here the standard cost we mean by is the labor cost. So if you observe here, so 800 rupees we are paying for all the 3 workers together for manufacturing 1000 units. So that comes to 80 paisa per unit. That is multiplied with the actual output, that is 960 units. So we get 768, which means the actual production that has taken place is only for 960 units. So accordingly, what should be the standard cost for these 960 units that we are supposed to first fix up? So this 800 is actually for 1000 units. Okay, but here this 838 is spent not for 1000 units but only for 960 units. So for that sake, we need to make a suitable adjustment in our total standard cost. So accordingly, this 800 which is there, it is divided by 1000 units. We get standard rate per unit, that is multiplied with the actual number of units that is manufactured, to know what is the standard cost for 960 units. Now this standard cost 768 is compared with 838. So we get the direct labor cost variance to be adverse. This is a first calculation when you want to do direct labor cost variance calculation. Now let's move on to labor rate. So in case of labor rate variance, so the next is about direct labor rate variance. So under the direct labor rate variance, so the comparison is between the standard wage rate minus the actual wage rate, that is multiplied with the actual hours. So in this case, if you observe, so in case of for the men, so the standard wage rate given for the men is 1 rupee 25 paisa, whereas the actual wages paid for the men is given as 1 rupee 20 paisa. So that is multiplied with the actual hours. So actual hours is computed by multiplying this number of men 13 into 40. So we get 520. So accordingly, if you observe, the actual wage rate paid is less than the standard, so you get favorable variance. Accordingly, for women, the standard is 80 paisa, but it is paid 85 paisa, so you get here adverse. For boys, it is 70 paisa, but we are paying only 65, so it's again a favorable. So that comes to 24 rupees as a favorable variance, that is labor rate variance. Now moving on to the third one, that is labor efficiency variance. So while calculating the labor efficiency variance, so it's a comparison between the standard time and the actual time. and that is multiplied with the standard wage rate. So the information that is given for us was basically the standard time for the actual output. First we need to find out, because whatever standard time was given here, it is for basically for manufacturing 1000 units, that is 400 hours, 200 hours, 200 hours. So this is the standard time given for manufacturing 1000 units, but since we are manufacturing only 960 units, so we need to find out what should be the standard time. So accordingly what I'll do is, first I'll calculate the standard time, that is 400 multiplied with 960 divided by 1000. So this is basically 400 is the standard time given for 1000 units. So for 960, how much? So it comes to just 384 hours. Similarly for women and similarly for boys, I am going to calculate. Now once this calculation has been done, then I'll calculate the direct labor efficiency variance. So by comparing that standard time with the actual time, if I observe the actual time spent by the men is more than the standard time, so there is an adverse variance. In case of women, it is the actual time is less than the standard, it is a favorable. In case of boys also it is a favorable. Hence the labor efficiency variance we get as a adverse. It is 94 rupees as a adverse. The next category of calculation is idle time variance. So why this idle time variance we are calculating this problem? Because out of 40 hours in a week, 2 hours were lost due to the abnormal idle time. So this 2 hours is applicable for all the 3 category of employees. Because all the employees are not going to work during that particular 2 hours of time. So hence we need to calculate what is the idle time variance. So idle time variance for men is equal to, so number of workers, that is men, if there are 13, 2 hours multiplied with standard wage rate. So idle time variance will always have a adverse because it's a loss of time. So accordingly 43 rupees 10 paisa is the idle time variance on account of 2 hours of, that is the abnormal time, that is a wastage. Finally we have direct labor mix variance. So the direct labor mix variance when calculating, so again we need to look 2 things. One is the total standard hours and the actual total hours taken. In case if there is any difference between these two, then only we should go for revised standard time calculation. Now in this problem, if you observe the total actual time the workers really spent for doing the work is, so it comes to 760 hours, because 800 hours the laborers have worked. Again I go back to the previous one so that you are able to understand. So total 800 hours all the laborers together have spent, but out of this 800 hours, 2 hours is the idle time. When 2 hours being the idle time, so 2 hours comes to how much is the total idle time that they have spent. So if I take that into consideration, so totally in all how many workers are there? If you observe, that is 13 plus 3 is 16, 16 plus 4 is 20. So there are in all 20 workers and 2 hours is idle, so 20 into 2 is 40. Which means out of 800 hours actually they are supposed to work, 40 hours is the idle hours time. So if I minus this, so the actual time they have spent is only 760 hours. Now when this is 760 hours is the actual time spent, so I need to find out what is the revised standard hours. So when I calculate for each category of these employees, so accordingly 760 is the actual time. The standard was 800, so 760 divided by 800 multiplied with the standard time given for the each category, that is 400, 200, 200 which is mentioned, that I am supposed to write up here. So 760, that is the total actual time they have spent, divided by total standard time is 800 multiplied with the standard time of each category of employees. Comes to 380, 190 and 190. Now accordingly the direct labor mix variance is equal to standard rate multiplied by revised standard time. So revised standard time is foreman is 380, actual hours spent by them is 494. So where this 494 comes from? So 494 from where do we get here? So if you observe here, 520 hours, actually if the things are on proper way, that is properly, if all the workers have spent the time, then they have to spend 520. But since 2 hours is the what you call the idle time, so 2 hours into the number of workers is 13 to the 26. So if I show you just a rough calculation here, from 520 if I minus 26, so you get how much? That is 494. So this total 494 is basically from that particular calculation. So 494 you are going to get in this particular manner. Similarly, how do you get 154 is same way. So there are 4 women, and if they worked completely for 40 hours, then it should be actually 160 hours. But this 4 women's 2 hours is idle, so 4 into 2 is 8. So if I minus from 168, so I get here 152. So accordingly, when we compare the revised standard hours with the actual time spent by the workers, so we'll get to know the material, that is a labor mix variance. And in this problem again, if you observe, so there is an adverse labor mix variance. Last but not least is about the direct labor yield variance. So the direct labor yield variance is a comparison between standard output and the actual output. So the standard output for the actual time is that is 950. So how this 950 we have got, that is important. So if you just observe this entire calculation what is mentioned here, so actually if the workers are spending 800 hours in all total, so they are supposed to manufacture 1000 units, but since they only spend 760 hours, then accordingly, so the number of standard output they are supposed to manufacture is actually 950 units. So this 950 is the standard output. So but actual output, how much we have got is already given here, that is 960 units they are manufactured. So they have manufactured more than what is required. So 950 was expected, but they manufactured 960, and there is a favorable labor yield variance. So in this way, so we discussed about labor rate variance, labor efficiency variance, labor mix variance, labor cost variance, labor yield variance, and idle time variance. So this is one more problem which I am giving it for you to practice. So this problem kindly practice by applying all this previous whatever we have discussed, so that you'll be able to get complete understanding about the labor variance. So you can just look at this particular problem correctly, and then please you can solve one by one all the different types of variance. Thank you.